Good morning, afternoon, and evening. This is Ahead of the Curve with Boyce Brown and Mark French. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, good. Great to see you.
You as well. This is news, geopolitics, and related matters ripped from today's headlines and providing you the context as well. We have been doing a series on Ahead of the Curve of 911 motive, means, and opportunity. And we are now at the fateful third opportunity segment. And let's start by considering the role of NORAD and the FAA in that debacle. So, air traffic control monitors all civil aviation and is in constant radio communication with each flight in our airspace, right?
Yeah.
But when flights lose contact or they depart from their filed flight plans, there's routine procedures to get a fighter jet up there to intercept them right away. And we are supposed to assume that in this case, on this day, there was a complete and total failure of the entire system of both FAA and NORAD?
It's quite a coincidence.
Yes. And I would argue that there are two further reasons that provided the moment of the opportunity of the ability to create the crime, to engage in the crime. There was also a crucial stand down order from someone in command of the Northeast section of NORAD. And there were a number of war games going on that day.
Yeah.
Even more than the ones listed here: Vigilant Guardian, Amalgam Warrior, Amalgam Virgo, and Global Guardian. And Apollo Guardian tied in with Global Guardian, which was Space Command. That one must be classified because I have not been able to find any evidence of what they did. And the guy that did the stand down order has links to Huffman Aviation in Hollywood or in Venice, Florida, where Atta and another hijacker, quote unquote, trained. So in that stew, we can find what happened. So let's look at Amalgam Virgo just for a second. One of the war games that was going on during 9/11. It had at its center a picture of a one Osama bin Laden, surrounded by planes. As the manufactured, he was our terrorist in Kosovo and Chechnya and Bosnia, and of course the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. But here he is in a PowerPoint presentation for Amalgam Virgo that occurred in June. Right in the middle, combined joint training for unconventional threat. And notice surrounding him are all aircraft and drones.
Yeah.
And the SecDef, as they say, they love acronyms and abbreviations in DC. The SecDef at the time was a one William Cohen under Clinton, and he said that the United States faces a quite real threat of terrorist, nuclear, chemical, or biological attacks on national soil within 10 years. So they were prepping us, I dare say. Predictive programming. And here's a shortly after 9/11, or shortly before 9/11, there was a case that everyone pointed to because it involved a celebrity golfer, Payne Stewart. His Learjet depressurized on his way from Florida to Dallas, and on October 26, 1999, it depressurized. Within 21 minutes, he's got a fighter jet on his plane. They passed it off to a succession of other fighter planes until it finally ran out of gas and crashed in North Dakota. In 2000, these type of intercepts had occurred 129 times. In the year 2001, just through the end of June, the year of 9/11, it occurred 67 times. And according to a memorandum for the record written for the 9/11 Commission, all four of these war games, Vigilant Guardian, Amalgam Warrior, Amalgam Virgo, and Global Guardian, were all approved by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the commander of NORAD. All approved. So we would also imagine operational. So in an earlier iteration of Vigilant Guardian, let's pull up a slide there. October 2000, they practiced for a interception of a suicide hijacking of a airliner into the 39-story United Nations building. So they're already practicing running planes into buildings. Let's pull up that slide there. And this is a command, and then Vigilant Guardian in a later iteration in 2001 had a command post exercise the week before 9/11. And among the 9 scenarios that it gamed out, they all involved hijackings. This is pretty small. Let's see if I can expand it and read it for our 5 listeners. Put on the eyeglasses here.
Sure.
The exercise will be conducted live on the air sovereignty string. All expansion, this is the third complete paragraph. Expansions and evacuations. All expansions will be real world. The losing sector, let's expand it here so I can read it a little better. The expanding sector, all expansions will be real world. The losing sector will leave a pre-identified hip pocket team in place to handle any real world contingencies. NORAD's Northeast sector hip pocket manning will be contingent on real world requirements. Under exceptional, at the end of third paragraph, except under exceptional circumstances, an expansion will not be terminated due to a real world scramble.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Vigilant Guardian. Now we can also take a look at Amalgam Virgo. These slides are taking so long. I'll just run through it with words.
Sure.
So real world means real aircraft. Field training exercises, Amalgam Warrior and Amalgam Virgo, were planned for and possibly operational on 9/11. Field training exercises, live exercises using live planes.
Well, this is how you continually hear those radio calls that day. Is this real world or is this exercise? Like they literally did not know.
It's using real planes, and it's also using fake blips on the NORAD and FAA radars. Here's
That's
a
right.
quote. Here's a quote from one of those Vigilant Guardian planning documents. Quote, a track is taken out of radar coverage and then reintroduced as an unknown coverage, as an unknown track. Still quoting from these planning documents for these war games. Amalgam Warrior is similar in nature to Vigilant Guardian and is a scenario run through as a war game. The primary purpose is to have live assets flying to check on communications connectivity and other technical capabilities and performance. Well, Amalgam Warrior's goal was to, quote, have a large-scale live fly exercise involving 2 or more NORAD regions. So I've showed our 5 listeners the cover page of the June 1, June 2, 2001 practice run of Amalgam Virgo that quoted Secretary Cohen. Counterterrorism, unconventional threat, predictive programming, getting people ready for introducing Osama bin Laden as the boogeyman. Now, at the center of the slide was Osama bin Laden, but let us look at a really interesting deep state actor, Richard Ben-Veniste. He gained fame as a prosecutor of Watergate. And because of the way Watergate was marketed and all the president's men with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, you know, it became a moment that the people and the vigilant media took down a crooked president. I don't think that's the entire story of Watergate, Mr. French.
Sure.
I think most of the plumbers, Nixon's group that were trying to plug the leaks in his administration, were deeply involved in the operationalization of the JFK murder. And so Richard Ben-Veniste's career, starting with Watergate, seems to make him out to be a guy that handles delicately the limited hangout of the intelligence world. And the limited hangout is where you give them a little bit, but not more than that, so that's enough to satiate the public and Congress's curiosity, but not enough to actually show the deep state at work. For example, Mr. Ben-Veniste went on to be a 911 commissioner, sure, but also on the Watergate, Whitewater investigation at the beginning of the Clintons. And he was Barry Seals' lawyer.
Mm.
Who is Barry Seals? Barry Seals is a pilot who basically was the entire aviation coordinator for the Iran-Contra wing, particularly bringing the coke from Central America to Mena, Arkansas. You know, all the people that the so-called right wing that's so bent out of shape about all of these fake conspiracy theories revolving around the Clintons. Well, some of them are true.
Yeah.
And it's not a partisan issue. and Mena, Arkansas, as a major landing spot for cocaine in Iran-Contra is one of them. This guy, Benveniste, was Barry Seal's lawyer, who brought in all that coke, who ran all those guns, and who was gunned down by a train track in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with George H.W.'s business card in his pocket. But be that as it may, he is the limited hangout guy, so he does introduce a bit of truth. And in testimony before the 9/11 Commission, he noted that Amalgam Virgo was, quote, a simulation of a simultaneous hijacking of two planes in the United States. So we have 4 war games that are simulating suicide terrorism in New York City.
Yeah.
War games that also involved live aircraft and screwing with the blips on FAA and NORAD radar.
Sure.
So we have all the elements to create an incredible amount of confusion for the air controllers that were working in good faith.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there were a couple that were plugged into the air traffic control world that were not in good faith.
Of course.
But probably most of them were. Let's take a look at the fighter response on this day of 9/11. The closest Air Force base was Otis near Falmouth in Cape Cod, and Massachusetts, and they received word too late to scramble jets at that time. And there is another important, and you see there they've changed their name from Otis to Joint Base Cape Cod, but there it is, that light green near Cape Cod. And okay, they're of no use. Too late. Oh, what a shame.
Right.
The next base that could have helped defend Manhattan was Atlantic City International Airport in Pomona, New Jersey. It has a FAA facility, trains air marshals, and it also houses the Jersey Devils, the fighter wing of the 177th New Jersey Air National Guard. So these guys have, by their own website, played an integral part of air defense for the continental United States for decades. Now, the good old 1998 Quadrennial Defense Review that we've referred to more than twice, it converted the mission of the 177th New Jersey Air National Guard from air sovereignty to general purpose fighter. And in spite of this degradation of readiness, 2 jets were on the runway at Atlantic City with enough time to make a difference. But the commander of the NORAD Region Northeast Air Defense Sector, NEADS, Robert Marr, is probably the one that called them to return, emergency order, return to hangar, while they're on the tarmac, gassed up, armed, ready to go.
Wow.
We can take a step back because the 911 overall operation, it was at least a decade in the planning, and it took a lot of steps and a lot of people taking those gradual steps for it to occur. Colin Powell, when he was still Joint Chief of Staff, He divided the continental United States into 4 quadrants, quote, each with its own headquarters, commanders, and bases on alert. And it reduced the amount of fighters, armed fighters on alert status at all times from 107 to 5 to 7. Thank you, General Powell. So we've got the slice and dice, has already been in effect for years. Robert Marr had been a veteran of the Air Force for 20 years until 1994. And then he spent a few months in Saudi Arabia as director of combat operations. Then he left the military for 2 years to work for a private company called Phoenix Air. Now, Phoenix Air, and I could show you another slide of one of the PowerPoint presentations of Amalgam Virgo. It says that the Phoenix Air provided aircraft for Amalgam Virgo. And we talked in 911 means that Stewart Air National Guard Base in Newburgh, New York, 30 miles north of Manhattan, is where the 2 planes out of Logan, Boston crossed. And that might have been where they were grounded so they could make their calls. And it might have been the base of operations for deep state aviation companies like Phoenix, who note that they specialize in electronic. Here's a quote from their website. They provide military clients with user-defined services, including highly modified aircraft for electronic attack, electronic warfare, electronic countermeasures, electronic countermeasures. So you've got the FAA and NORAD with all their blips. You have a company that specializes in fake blips and electronic warfare and counter warfare. So it just created utter chaos in the Northeast on the radars of FAA and NORAD. But let's take a look at Phoenix Air's connection with Huffman Aviation. They sent, upper right-hand picture there. This is a collage of pictures of Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida. This trained Muhammad Atta and one other guy.
Mm-hmm.
That upper right photo is the 12 to 15 aircraft that look like civilian jet airliners because they are like business jets because they are. Phoenix Airline gave Huffman Aviation 12 to 15 business jets.
Wow.
After Wallace Hillard and Rudy Deckards bought Huffman Aviation, it became a center of a series of financial scams, including Ponzi schemes, pension fraud, international stock swindles, fraudulent bankruptcy, all of which that totaled over $1 billion.
Yeah.
Wallace Hillard and Rudy Deckards. So they bought Huffman Aviation in summer of 1999. You see the pictures with the blue awning, and then they upscaled the picture in the bottom left to that grand palatial entrance.
Sure.
And in the bottom right are some of the Learjets that Huffman used for extraordinary rendition and enhanced interrogation,
Mm-hmm.
AKA kidnapping and torture program that America's been running and probably still is running.
Sure.
Okay, so these guys, Hillard and Deckards, they buy Huffman Aviation summer 1999. July 25, 2000, Wallace Hillard, his Learjet is busted carrying 43 pounds of heroin at Orlando Executive Airport. Orlando Sentinel called it the, quote, biggest bust of its kind in Central Florida history. And in the bottom left, you see a picture of Jeb Bush, Governor Jeb Bush, with the Hillard family.
Yeah.
So they're pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, the CIA loves their drug money. Washing $1 billion will get you some friends in high places.
Yeah, I think the same way that H.W. Bush went from New England to Houston to kind of blend the Yankee and the Cowboy power factions.
Yeah.
For him to then post up his boys in Texas and Florida, those are the two really obvious transshipment locations for drugs. Let's look at further drug connections with Huffman Aviation. A DC-9 registered to a company called Skyway used a hangar at Huffman Aviation as its address. And here's that DC-9 in the bottom right. Here's their logo, Skyways, in the bottom left. Notice how incredibly similar it looks to Department of Homeland Security's logo. So this DC-9 was caught in Campeche, Mexico, carrying 5.5 tons of cocaine.
Yeah.
And the Mexican authorities called it the biggest seizure in Yucatan history. Guess who its previous owner was, Mark? Ramil al-Batrawi.
Wow.
Adnan Khashoggi's lieutenant. In intelligence or finance, there's something called a beard. The beard owns assets for someone that doesn't want to be identified as owning them.
Yeah.
So I think in this case, the DC-9 was owned by el-Batrawi for Khashoggi. And
Sure.
this Adnan Khashoggi is indeed the father of Jamal Khashoggi.
Okay.
Who's always described as a dissident journalist that was brutally bone-sawed to pieces and boiled in acid in the Saudi embassy in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
He may have been that, but in intelligence, I don't think the fruit ever falls too far from the tree.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, it's all of the security agencies have their plants on purpose. Actors, media, artists. It's these kinds of deep roots and connections over multiple generations become pretty clear whenever you trace them back.
Yeah, I think Ghislaine Maxwell was probably continuing some of the intelligence work for Mossad and others that her dad, Robert Maxwell, did.
That's right.
And W is in the family business of intelligence and deep state politics as much as HW and Prescott Bush were.
Mm-hmm.
So the president of Skyway, and FAA refused to say who the new owner of it was that used as the address Huffman Aviation. FAA refused to divulge what should be a matter of public record. Who owns that DC-9 registered at Huffman Aviation's address that imported all that coke?
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't say. But the president of Skyways was a one Brent Kovar. And after he left his tenure as president of the drug running Skyway aircraft, you can note from the business cards featured on the slide that he went to a new job as Vice President of Research and Development for the Tracking Enforcement section of Homeland Security.
Wow, how convenient.
Right. So we are told that Muhammad Atta and his buddy went to this one random flight school. When they were deposited there, because that was a deep state flight school, that in exchange for favors to the deep state, they were allowed to run amok with doing $1 billion in financial fraud. And let's go back to the chaos created by all these war games in the FAA radars. So here's a quote, and you can go to stonefruit.substack.com for all the links. Hours after the hijacked planes flew into the World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon, and a Pennsylvania field, an FAA manager at the New York Air Route Traffic Control gathered 6 controllers who communicated or tracked 2 of the hijacked planes, not alleged, and recorded in a 1-hour interview their personal accounts of what happened. The day of, makes sense. Memo for file. What happened? Well, a second manager, perhaps remanded by intelligence, said he destroyed the tape into small pieces by crushing it with his hands, cutting it into small pieces, and depositing the pieces into trash cans all over the building. Oh, Boyce and Mark, I'm so sick of your incredible conspiracy theories. Where did you get that ludicrous idea? Washington Post, back when it still used to do journalism?
Wow.
There's the slide. FAA managers destroyed 9/11 tape. I'd sure like to hear what that was.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That would have had the whole story, I'd imagine, or a big chunk of. So let's begin to gallop towards a close by looking at those 4 war games, and in particular, how Global Guardian pulled them all together.
Yeah.
Global Guardian was commanded by a one Brent Scowcroft. Global Guardian it's a command level operation. It has as its fundamental purpose to test and maintain the readiness of, quote, nuclear command, control, and evacuation procedures. And a NORAD review document noted that, quote, Vigilant Guardian would be a full-blown nuclear war exercise, including bomber response and ICBM response. Global Guardian was coordinated with Vigilant Guardian so that the combined strategic command offensive capabilities and the NORAD defensive capabilities could be exercised. Now, they had live nukes in this exercise. Live nukes in the field. When Bush fled Sarasota, I believe, which is very close to Venice Jet Center.
Yeah.
Incidentally. And he started running all over the country. He landed first in Barksdale, Arkansas, Air Force Base. That base had live nukes on the tarmac when Air Force One landed. So we were monkeying around on that day with live nukes as well.
Wow.
So Scowcroft is the overall commander of Global Guardian. He was the chairman of the Federal Advisory Board.
Hmm.
So I'd say that made him essentially the commander of the day.
That's right.
And here's a slide to show us the many faces of Brent Scowcroft.
Hmm.
Because as we may recall from 911 Means, or was it Motive, one of the two, he was part of the clique in the October massacre during the Nixon administration when they got rid of all of the Nixon holdovers in the early months of the Ford administration. And who was in that clique? Brent Scowcroft took over National Security Advisor from Kissinger, who had that, and Secretary of State. He kept state. Scowcroft now National Security Advisor.
That's right.
Cheney becomes Chief of Staff. Rumsfeld becomes Defense Secretary, and H.W. Bush becomes CIA Director.
That's right.
Fast forward to H.W. Bush's administration. He's the president. Scowcroft is National Security Advisor again. Cheney is Defense Secretary, and Scowcroft, Rumsfeld is advising state. Then flash forward to W administration. HW is making buckets of money through Carlyle and other high finance groups. Scowcroft is chairman of the Federal Advisory Board for this Global Guardian exercise. Cheney is, of course, vice president and by all accounts running the administration, especially matters of war and oil. So this is a tight clique.
Yeah.
And they've been together for a long time.
That's right.
And I can just picture an interchange between HW and Brent Scowcroft, because they're in their 70s by now.
Mm-hmm.
Brent, hey buddy, you think you got one more campaign in you?
Mm-hmm.
It'll clear us a few billion. You got it, George. So this blew my mind because I was trying to figure out who might have been the commander of 9/11.
That's right.
If H.W. Bush was the architect, who's the commander? Initially, I thought someone like Richard Armitage, who probably participated in Operation Phoenix in the Vietnam War.
Sure.
Probably a CIA guy remanded to the military in the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Had progressively higher and higher roles in civilian life under Republican administrations. Not Powell, too much the Black Eisenhower.
That's right.
Wouldn't get his hands dirty with something like
Wouldn't
this.
get his hands dirty. Yeah.
So it was never offered. He's not in the inner circle anyway. So then I was, wow, could it have been Brent Scowcroft?
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, talk about having the operational chops and being all the way inside that tight of a crew. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then even though the CIA has 50 people specifically on the Wikipedia desk, I found this on Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
That Scowcroft was on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base in DC with an E-4B, which is a floating command and control platform to preserve continuity of government and direct any government responses to extreme emergencies like nuclear war.
Wow.
And in this capacity as chairman of Global Guardian, Federal Advisory Board.
Yeah.
So the morning of 9/11, Scowcroft is in an E-4B on the tarmac, Andrews Air Force Base, waiting to take off for the headquarters of Strategic Command at Offutt Air Base in Omaha, Nebraska,
Yeah.
where incidentally there's a business meeting with Warren Buffett and all these honchos at the base that day. Bracket that. So the capacities of this aircraft must be phenomenal and state of the art. So here's another quote, because the navigator, so my sources were Wikipedia, and the navigator of Scowcroft's flight this day
Mhm.
later became the commander of, I think, all of the military's PXs and
Sure.
exchanges. So the newsletter of the military's officers that run all the exchanges worldwide, it was a "where were you on 9/11" type of reflection of the guy who's now head of all the exchanges, but he was the navigator of Scowcroft's flight at that time, and he went into some detail. So essentially, this is a quote too, primary source. Scowcroft was involved in observing the command and control operations of both President W. Bush in Florida and Vice President Dick Cheney at the White House. If he can observe them, I would imagine Scowcroft could also communicate with them.
Absolutely.
If he can communicate with them, he is probably just watching to go to make sure everything is moving according to the plan, but
Mhm.
may offer some directions now and then.
Sure.
So here you see a picture of W disembarking from Air Force One at Offutt Air Force Base, HQ of Strategic Command in Nebraska. In the background is Scowcroft's E-4B. He arrived in Offutt just minutes before W arrived.
Wow.
So I believe we have now solved 911 opportunity. What was the moment that made it all possible? It was the convergence of the 4 war games that we mentioned, plus Apollo Guardian Space Command, which I didn't discuss because it must be classified because there's no information as to what its objectives were.
Sure.
This screwed up FAA's and NORAD's ability to monitor radar effectively because there were eliminated radar blips, inserted radar blips, and a number of live aircraft exercises simulating exactly what's happening, quote, allegedly happening, suicide hijack aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask you, Mark, is it possible, purely for the purposes of entertainment, not for any
Sure.
criminal
Yeah.
allegations, just having a little fun here, but could H.W. Bush have been the architect and Brent Scowcroft the commander of the day?
I mean, that wouldn't be a shocking surprise at all. I mean, there's overlapping connections. There are, every single time we look into these corporate filings, there's tons of crossover between all of their S corporations and shadow corporations. There are banking relationships. How is it that Mar magically goes to spend a couple of years in Saudi Arabia? You know, closer direct contact with the bin Laden family. I mean, there's just the Carlisle crossover, Taliban coming to Houston all the time. I mean, these guys have been a tight crew since the late 60s. So for them, once the businesses are in place and the plan is put in place, these guys come and go from public to private for operational crossover, handing each other titles whenever they need to. So I mean, there it is. I think it's not only plausible, but at this point is likely probable.
And this was in 9/11 Means, the second of our three-part series. This is the third, in which we discussed that George H.W. Bush, his former defense secretary, Frank Carlucci, and his lifetime consigliere, James Baker, were all at Saudi-owned Ritz-Carlton in D.C. for a Carlyle Group meeting.
That's right.
On the morning of 9/11 with the patriarch of the Bin Laden family.
That's right.
And of course, in the days after, as civilian air traffic slowly started to resume, a jumbo jet full of bin Ladens was whisked right out of the country in the days immediately following 9/11.
Well, the other interesting side note that just came up within the last few minutes or so is I think it'd be worth it to take a look at the 30 or 45 days prior of Warren Buffett's trading behavior.
He might have been involved in the puts. I don't have any evidence of that, but I sure find it weird that there was a meeting of business leaders at the commanding heights as people like Warren Buffett at Offutt that morning.
Right.
I mean, except for Buffett, Omaha is not a major business center.
No, it isn't.
Some significant presence in insurance, but not
Well,
gigantic.
and I mean again, what are the mathematical chances of timing being that perfect? I mean, come on.
Yeah. And as I go through my notes to kind of put a bow on everything, you know, Hillard's Learjet that got busted for carrying 43 pounds of heroin.
Yeah.
After they bought Huffman Aviation.
Sure.
It was also implicated in a attempt with Adnan Khashoggi to take over Rum Cay Island in the Bahamas, presumably so they could use it for running drugs and guns.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hillard's own Learjet was connected to Rum Cay and Adnan Khashoggi.
Mm-hmm.
So as we rebrand and uptool and upscale our operation here at Ahead of the Curve, this is what you can expect. News and politics with an eye to the deep politics background. This has been a third of a three-part series of 9/11, motive, means, and now opportunity. Stay tuned for the next illustrious show. Signing off from 5 miles from Pearl Harbor. Aloha.